It is March 30th, 2020. I'm Melissa Pache, the CEO at the Whistler Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to first acknowledge that we're having this virtual meeting on these shared unceded traditional territories of the Squamish-Lillooet Nations, and we honor their language, culture, land, and traditions. So today's topic is the second in a series of what we call COVID-19 business support. And today we're focusing on the federal government and provincial government funding measures. The purpose of these series of webinars is to ensure that you, our members, and the broader business community in Whistler have the opportunity to have your most pressing questions answered by experts who will be providing guidance and support for you to navigate through these challenging times. Today we're using Zoom, the Zoom Q&A question answer box to pose your questions to our panel. So for those of you that have joined us today on our webinar, you can see that there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Click on that. You can go to the Q&A section there on your screen. Simply type in your question, and you can also hit the like button to upvote a question, which will then automatically be placed as the most voted at the top. So I'd like to start by thanking all of our members for your continued support for the Chamber, support the Chamber receives through your annual partnership and commitments enabling us to do the important work that we're doing. Today we are honored to have with us Patrick Weiler, MP, West Vancouver-Sunshine Coast and Sea to Sky. Good morning, Patrick, in West Vancouver, I believe. And then Jordan Sturdy, our MLA for West Vancouver Sea to Sky, is joining us from Pemberton. So before we hear from both Patrick and Jordan, I'd like to share the latest COVID-19 business impact survey that was released on March 18th. Now, this survey was in collaboration with the entire BC Chamber network. There were over 8,000 respondents. The data that I'm about to give you, just 3 points highlighting, this is Whistler-specific data. So in Whistler, 98% of businesses are currently impacted by COVID-19. Not a surprise, with the majority of our businesses temporarily closed. 91% say that they will see a dramatic drop in revenue, with 44% saying they're at risk of going out of business as this trend continues. So as a pulse check, in collaboration again with the BC Chamber and our Chamber network, we have recently launched a second survey, literally as a pulse check, and you'll be seeing this come out every 2 weeks. And this is, please be sure to fill that out. You can go to our Chamber website or keep an eye on our e-newsletters, and that way we can continue using that data to advocate for you, our members in the business community, and also to provide data for the governments to continue the great work that they've been doing. So on that note, it's my pleasure now to introduce you to our panelists. First off, our MP, Patrick Weiler. Wow, Patrick, 6 months into your job, into your position, was elected to represent the riding of West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country in the House of Commons of Canada in 2019 Canadian federal election. Wow, what a way to start. And then Jordan Sturdy, our MLA for West Vancouver, Sea to Sky, was re-elected as MLA for West Vancouver Sea to Sky in 2017. He currently serves as the official opposition critic for jobs. Jordan previously served as Minister of Environment, Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Environment, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, and as a member of the Cabinet Committee of Environment and Land Use. So Jordan lives with his family in Pemberton and owns and operates North Arm Farm. So you know all too well, obviously, Jordan, the effects that COVID-19 has had on small business. Before we get to Jordan, Patrick, let's begin with you. We had some interesting news this morning from our Prime Minister. The federal government has a 3-point system to support businesses across the country. Would you like to start off by giving us an update?
Sure. Well, first, good morning, everybody. And thank you, Melissa, for the kind introduction here. I will get to the news announcements today, but I just have a few things I want to go through before we get there. So it's a pleasure to connect with everybody. As Melissa said, I'm connecting from my home, where I've been working from for about 2.5 weeks since Parliament got suspended. Parliament's not in session again until the end of, until at least April 20th, but likely much further than that. So really the focus for me has been on everything that's going on in the riding, with a big focus on helping people with any advice and health related matters. With travel, there's a number of constituents that are trying to get home, and so working with consular affairs to help facilitate that. And importantly for today, big focus on business and what some of the impacts of COVID have been to that. So it's always a pleasure to be at a Whistler Chamber event. I had the opportunity to be in a debate, which was probably the best debate that we had during the campaign. And I had an opportunity about a month and a half ago. It seems like much longer than that now, to be in Whistler for an event focused on providing some transportation solutions.
Right.
And actually, a couple weeks ago, we were going to have another event, which was be focused with Jordan and I and the Canadian Chamber as well, focusing on transportation, labor, housing, childcare, cost of doing business. And so unfortunately we had to cancel that event. So I'm really happy that we can have the opportunity today to be able to speak to you and be able to field some of your questions. So I think more than ever before, chambers are incredibly important. Just as a way of us getting information about what some of the impacts have been to you. And it's really great to hear that there's going to be a survey done every couple of weeks, because then we can get a better sense of what the impacts are, what some of the programs, how some of the programs that have been developed at the federal and provincial level help address those. And so we can kind of course correct and improve on those going forward. And I can tell you that I hear from Melissa more than the head of any other chamber. So that should give everybody some level of comfort.
You gave me your cell phone number. That was I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Jordan gets it from me too.
But no, and I think that's great, because I want to hear as much as I can, both in terms of the overall impacts, but also some of the anecdotal impacts. And that's really, really valuable for us. And given the importance, or given the impact of COVID to the tourism sector and the importance of tourism to Whistler, this is especially important. And one of the things that we're doing right now, we're in the process of developing stimulus for different sectors. So we're going to be developing that for energy, for aviation, and tourism, among other areas. And so this feedback is incredibly important. So I'm really, really glad to have the opportunity to hear this today. So Olivier, maybe we could just jump into some of the first slide here. So what I'd like to talk about briefly is just what we have as some of our existing programs right now, both for individuals and businesses. And then I'll talk a little bit about what's coming down the pipeline and how you can contribute to that. So the first slide here, it's kind of an overview of the measures that we announced back about a week and a half ago. And the first focus for the government was making sure that we're putting money in the pockets of Canadians that are going to be immediately needing that. So the first thing we did was we waived the waiting period for the employment insurance program. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, we're going to provide a top up to the GST tax credit, which is going to be $400 for individuals, $600 for couples, which is going to be received in May. We're providing a one-time top up to the Canada Child Benefit, which will be $300 per child, the May payment. Importantly, both for individuals, but also for businesses, we were providing for mortgage payment deferrals for up to 6 months. So this is automatic with the CMHC insured mortgages, and we negotiated with the 6 biggest banks to have that provided by those banks as well. And I know there's been a little bit of a patchy implementation of this when you get to monoline lenders, but it's something I would suggest getting in contact with your bank about if you're interested. Mm-hmm. In addition to this, we're provided a 6-month moratorium on repayments of student loans. We pushed back the income tax filing date to June 1st with no payments necessary until September 1st. And importantly, for a lot of the people that were kind of fell through the cracks with EI, we created the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. And so, Olivia, actually, could you flip 2 slides ahead? I'll have the qualifications for that. So this benefit is going to be administered by CRA. And what it is, it's a $2,000 a month payment for workers who are either out of work because of COVID-19 or that don't have or not making an income. So this will qualify for people that are sick, that are quarantined, parents that have to stay home to take care of their children because of COVID, workers that they're self-employed, gig workers, contract workers, and pretty much everybody else that wouldn't qualify for EI but are without an income because of COVID. So Olivier, maybe we could actually go back one slide if you don't mind. So I want to jump into what we're doing for business. And as Melissa pointed out, it's a 3-point plan. The first focus is on the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which details came out this morning. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit for those that lose their jobs, which I just mentioned, and lastly, loans and credit for companies that are looking for cash flow right now. So the big news today was on the wage subsidy. So we announced a 10% wage subsidy a couple of weeks ago. That was very easy to administer because it was just reducing remittances of income tax that was withheld on employees' remuneration. So that was immediate. There was a big pushback that this wasn't going to be enough. And so what we brought in as of today was up to 75% of employee wages will be supplemented by the federal government for a period of 3 months. And this will be retroactive until back to March 15th. So this applies for companies and nonprofits of all sizes, as long as they can prove that their revenues have decreased by 30% because of COVID. And it's up to 75% of wages on the first $58,700 that you make. And so this qualifies for up to $847 per week. So that's one program. Another program that we didn't announce but is been actually in existence for a while is the work sharing program. And I would invite everybody to have a look at this. And this is a program for full-time workers and organizations that are operating for at least 2 years that see reduction in normal business activities for reasons out of their control, such as COVID. And it's applied for by businesses and employees. And what it means is if you need to reduce somebody's hours, they can qualify for EI for the days that they're no longer working. So this is a program I would suggest having a look into if it makes sense for your business. With respect to taxes, we've deferred the GST remittances and customs duty payments until June 30th. And business income taxes are deferred until September 1st. And lastly, the third point of this plan is the loans and credit that's available. So we created the Canada Emergency Business Account on Friday, and this provides for SMEs and nonprofits with payroll between 50 grand and $1 million last year. You can get access to a $40,000 interest-free loan through your bank. And if this loan is repaid by the end of 2022, up to 25% of that loan is forgiven. In addition to that, we put more money in Export Development Canada and the Business Development Bank of Canada for companies to access for credit. In addition to this, there's the loan guarantee program that's been created for Export Development Canada for credit and cash flow by banks, and a co-lending program for SMEs that was created by the Business Development Bank of Canada for cash flow as well. So that's kind of a very quick overview of the programs that we've developed. My ask to you is to give some feedback on some of these existing programs, and also give us some suggestions about what we might be able to change, especially for how this might be able to be tweaked and better serve sectors like tourism. And those are things that are definitely coming down the road. I can tell you that federal government is working faster than ever before. I have a daily opportunity to raise issues with ministers and the rest of my caucus, and change is happening very quickly. And I'll just give you a very brief example because I know I'm running over time. I had a constituent that was concerned about not wanting to go to the PO box to pick up their mail because they're in social isolation. So we were able to negotiate with Canada Post to have their mail held there for more than 2 weeks before it got sent back. And this is just from reaching out to Canada Post and suggesting a very simple change. And I think things like that, there's a unique opportunity right now to have federal government operate quickly. So I think I'll just end it at there. But maybe just to end it, Olivia, maybe if you could flip to the website. So everything that I've talked about is on Canada's COVID-19 Economic Response Plan landing page. It's segmented by different stakeholder groups. So if you have any questions about the details of things, I would suggest going there first. And also communicating with my office if there's something specific you have a question about. But always just stay engaged with your chamber. You know, they're doing incredible work in telling me about what the impacts are. And this is absolutely being listened to right now, and we need your feedback so we can make sure that we're developing makes sense for you. So with that, I just want to thank the chamber for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to your feedback and questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Jordan, would you like to take over on the provincial side?
Sure. Thanks very much, Melissa. Challenging time for all of us, obviously. And as you can see, personal grooming is one of those non-essential pieces of industry. So I apologize for this, but I'm working from Pemberton. I have to acknowledge my staff as well. Nicola is in Whistler, and then in West Vancouver, I have Andrea and Sharon, and everybody is working hard to be available to all of you as constituents with the questions that you may have that we'll try and find answers for. The provincial circumstances are that the province is trying to navigate a way to dovetail into the federal programs and the federal announcements. It's obviously very much a moving target. There are trying to be responsive, recognizing, of course, that the provincial economy is significantly smaller. The provincial budget is significantly smaller than the federal budget. Although we do have to work to solve our unique problems here in British Columbia. So to look, just a quick review, as most of you will know, the federal or the Solicitor General announced a provincial state of emergency, and by doing so, lifted or made suspended all the local states of emergency, because the approach was to try and ensure that we had a consistent approach across British Columbia, and that we're treating everybody fairly, and rather than sort of unique approaches in each community, trying to make sure that everybody gets the services that they need. So the focus for the Solicitor General was to ensure that our supply chains remain intact, so that we can continue to support people in the province, that we're protecting consumers, and that we're emphasizing the need for minimal travel or necessary only critical travel, which is really a challenge, obviously, for us in the Sea to Sky, because that's what we do is encourage people to come. And then the Solicitor General also published a list of essential services to hopefully provide some clarity to business as to what is critical, what is needed, what is essential, and what's not. As most of you will know, the provincial health officer went through some modeling last week to look at what our projections are, not so much projections, but what is the trajectory of our response, and what's happening in communities and across the province. And she did say, and I think it's important to recognize that if we continue to do what we need to be doing, what we are doing right now, that there is reason to be optimistic that we will have a response that we can handle within our healthcare system. But that means that everybody has to continue to do what you're doing right now, and so we can continue to bend down the curve. Now, in terms of the announcements, generally speaking, overall, the province has put together a $5 billion plan, which does pale when compared with the federal response But it is broken down into two components, essentially 2.8 billion of the 5 billion on people and 2.2 billion on business. So 1.7 is to supplement critical services around healthcare, social assistance programs, housing and shelter programs, First Nations health authorities, nonprofits, and support for licensed daycares to help them stay open in this difficult time as a critical service. In terms of the supports for individuals, there's a one-time $1,000 payment to those who are eligible for some of the federal programs, including EI and emergency support benefits and that sort of thing. So if I think it's important to make sure that your employees are registering, or at least being part of the EI program or the emergency support benefit program or the emergency care benefit program, so that you're tied into the system, and then it'll dovetail with the provincial opportunities. Government intends to get the money out to people as soon as possible, although that'll probably be in association with the federal deliveries. There's some climate action top-ups, so some additional revenues or monies made available through climate action. And there's some increased funding for senior support for SAFER and RAP programs. BC housing evictions have been halted, and I think you've heard announcements around a variety of things. And the Premier has said that nobody should be evicted as a result of COVID. And frankly, nobody should lose their job as a result of COVID in the long run as well. So some legislation was passed on Monday to support that. Then there's some money gone to a number of other programs, but the ones, including student loans payments have been frozen until September. BC Hydro, crisis funding grants for up to $600, and but although you must already be in arrears for that. And there's some deferment available for ICBC and as well as BC Hydro. But and then tax filings have been pushed back to September, including for employers' health tax, PST, MRDT, carbon tax, motor fuel tax, and tobacco tax. And then others have been delayed in terms of implementation around the increase in the carbon taxes has been delayed. The Netflix tax has been delayed, as well as the sugary drinks tax. Of particular interest to businesses, the property tax relief of $500 million, which will apply to class 4, 5, and 6, and this is for 50% a reduction in the school tax. And the 4, 5, and 6 is the major industries, light industry, and business. So this is the expectation, as the province has said, is that these reductions are flow-throughs and should pass on to the businesses. But that only amounts, frankly, to about $700 million of the of the announced $2.2 billion on business, and the remaining $1.5 billion is pushed off to recovery. So now this is an evolving time, evolving circumstances, and that may change. But recovery, I think it's fair to say, as we move farther along the continuum here of response, is recovery is increasingly far away, it seems to me, from a sea to sky perspective. So we'll be pushing to look to how we can, what can we do for our tourism-oriented economy. There has been a $20 million announcement with regard to tourism and culture, but there is no details associated with that. So I can't tell you what the $20 million will be spent on or how it'll be spent. And some other, I think I could probably leave it at that for now.
It's a great update, Jordan and Patrick. Thank you both for giving us an update. I know a lot of questions that we may have, you may not have the answers to, but still really appreciate you being on the call today. And I'm sure I'm seeing some questions pop up and fighting for positioning as people vote on them. But if anything, it gives us an opportunity as a community to know that you're there, and we know you are, and we know very much that you're working very hard to keep us in a good situation, especially like Jordan said, on the recovery side. So I'm not going to jump into any questions. I'm going to go straight to our Q&A. And Kevin Wallace is with Earls. This question's for Patrick. How does EI or Canada, or the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, work for temporary foreign workers who are still here that may not have achieved the needed qualifying hours?
Okay, that's a good question. And as far as I understand it, that is that they wouldn't qualify right now. But that's something I'll have to look into a little bit more. And it's something that has been raised a few times in our caucus meeting. But I haven't, originally they did not qualify. Right. So it is something that that I know is really important, especially in Whistler. So it's something that I'll be able to hopefully have some news on to share very soon.
Great, that would be fantastic. Our community is definitely heavy on the tourism side, and certainly we've always relied on the temporary foreign workers, many of which, by the way, have gone home, but for those that are still here is going to be vital to keep our businesses open. Joel Chevalier, nice to see you out there, Joel. Jordan, and a question for you. Nice to see you, he says. Does the provincial one-time 1,000 top-up only apply to those that qualify for EI, or do those that qualify for CERB also qualify for that top-up? Do you know at this point if that's?
My understanding was that you needed to be registered and apply for, you have to be registered somehow. So that means through EI or through CERB or through some other program. But we can certainly get clarity for you, Joel.
Okay. Kathy Jewett is one of our counselors here in Whistler. Welcome, Kathy. This one's for Patrick. Will non-for-profits that also run a food bank be able to take advantage of the 75% wage subsidy, or is this plan to have enough support through other funding?
The wage subsidy absolutely applies.
Yeah, and that's what was the greatest news. I mean, for us as a non-for-profit, we were very excited to hear that we're eligible for that. So thank you for that. Jim Charters. Oh, where did Jim just go? There you are. Jim is on the construction trade side. What are the details of the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy? You may not have that yet, obviously, but will businesses or employees be required to pay the monies back in some way?
Okay, well, the details are still being worked out. There's going to be an announcement tomorrow with the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Small Business and Export Development. So all of the details, the remaining details will be worked out then. As far as I understand it, what I've already mentioned today, wage subsidy up to 75% for 3 months, retroactive to March 15th. For companies of all sizes, nonprofits, you can show the revenues decreased by 30%. This will max out at $847 a week. But as far as I understand it, there would be no requirement to pay this back.
Okay, thank you. The subsidy seems to be a very big theme in our questions this morning. I can see it looking through it, so bear with us while we get through that. Pepe owns several restaurants in Whistler, but also in Vancouver, asks, can restaurants apply for the $40,000 loan?
Yes,
okay.
they will be able to apply for that, and I know that that is really important because the business credit availability program, which we announced about a week and a half ago, there were some challenges with having banks actually give that to different businesses, and this will facilitate that much more so. And of course, also provides the no interest and provide for the 25% loan forgiveness if it's repaid by the end of 2022.
Right. And then also, Pepe, how is the 75% wage subsidy going to be given to businesses? This will impact decision making.
My understanding is it's going to be, and just kind of reading through the tea leaves, is that this is going to be administered by CRA.
Right.
But more details on this are going to be available tomorrow.
Okay, great. On the Kelty Holdsworth, is the emergency benefit means tested based on prior year tax returns?
Sorry, can you repeat that question, Melissa?
Is the emergency benefit, I guess, means tested based on prior year tax returns? So yeah, are they looking at last year's tax returns in order to be eligible for the emergency benefits?
Well, the emergency response benefit will also be administered by CRA. And how it's going to work is you need to fill a attestation form to show that in the eligibility requirements, you need to be over the age of 15. You need to show that you've been without income for 2 weeks as a result of COVID. And the other eligibility requirement is you need to attest to the fact that you've made at least $5,000 in the last calendar year or the last 12 months. Okay. So it's something you're providing this information by attestation. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind it was to make this as simple and as quick as possible so we can get money into people's hands. Right. So it's immediately, you're not going to immediately have your last year's tax filings looked at, but you are making that commitment. So there could be checks later on to show that that is based in the evidence, the facts.
Makes sense. To move it over a little bit around rent, I'm jumping around a little bit. Sarah McCullough has a very good question. We're approaching a very important week this week where rent is due, leases are, everything's going to happen on April 1st. The question she has with both of you is, what should renters do with rents due on April 1st? What's your recommendation if you have one? What would that look like?
Well, the recommendations provincially are that if you can pay your rent, pay your rent. I know that's harsh, but it is what it is, and landlords need to make payments as well. So that's the message from the province, is to, if you can, pay your rent. With regard to the rental subsidy, the $500 per month that's paid directly to landlords, it is a little bit awkward in that it is per unit, not per person. And it's up to the tenant to actually apply for that program.
Okay. I'm seeing a question here from Kevin Wallace on that. Let me just ask you that question. You may have just answered it. I'm playing double duty here. So, hi Jordan, this is for you again. There is a $500 rental relief coming this week, getting paid directly to the landlords, but it's a little unclear. Is the $500 per renter or $500 per property being rented? I have one house in, it's jumping around. I have one house that 5 of my team members live in and pay $5,000 in rent. There are laid off servers and bartenders. So yeah, is it per renter or per house? It's
my understanding is that it's per household. They're assuming 100% uptake of rent or of units, which would equate to about $250 million a month. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, that comes out of the $1.7 billion that government announced for supports for people. So if we go on for a number of months, that is going to chew into that amount fairly significantly. Yeah.
Okay.
And again, I have to remind everybody that the tenant has to apply in order for the landlord to get access to the money.
And does the tenant need to be on the lease, or can the tenant have an agreement? Because some of them don't have leases; they might just be on someone else's lease. So you may not have an answer to that question, but just if you do,
we're keeping track of these questions, and we'll try and list them out once we get it.
Okay, great. Pepe also asked, would there be consideration to push back the wage subsidy date for season resorts that have no way to take advantage of that since we're closed? There's no reason for us to rehire as no one is in town.
So, yeah, I mean, this is something I haven't heard of as of yet, but it's something I'll bring up in my caucus meeting today. In terms of there's what I can tell you with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Once you go through your EI, you'd still be eligible for the Canada Emergency Response Benefit if you're going through that program. Mm-hmm. So those can be done kind of back to back. I haven't heard the details of whether the wage subsidy would be likewise, but of course the details are still forthcoming, and it's a good time for me to raise that before the final details are out, and I'll do that later today.
Great. That'd be great. From Eric Molnar, oops, I'm using the wrong one. For the wage subsidy, can you elaborate on the up to 75% coverage, which you may not because it was just announced. But if you do, what are the qualifications that will be used to determine what level of business will qualify?
Well, my understanding is that all businesses would qualify, provided that you can show your revenues have decreased by 30% because of COVID.
Right.
And so it's, and I think, yeah, I probably shouldn't venture into speculating too much on this. What I can tell you is that it's 75% or up to 75% on your revenues, which will max out at $847 a week. So it's 75% on the first 58,700. So I'll just leave it at that, but there'll be more details tomorrow.
Okay, great. From Priyanka, rent is the biggest expense for F&B sectors while we are closed. Is there any way to see if there is any relief coming for this? And you may not have an answer for it, and if you don't, that's okay too. So that's the biggest thing right now, is where the expectation of having answers is tough because a lot of this is coming out very quickly. But yeah, if you do, that's great.
Well, from a provincial perspective, as I mentioned, there is really just the $500 per unit at this point in time. There has been little to, or there's been lots of discussion, but no announcements around commercial leases or commercial rent, or the risks associated for businesses with those leases. So we're working and pushing the province to have a policy around this.
Great. Thank you, Jordan. Jackie Basilian is the Canada Emergency Response benefit of up to $2,000 a month for 4 months available for business owners who have closed their business.
Yes. Yeah, it is available. So it's, like I said, it's people that are without income as a result of COVID for a minimum of 2 weeks. So that would include business owners in that as well.
Great, thank you. From James Kirkwood, is self-employed person loses some contracts, but not all contracts due to COVID, will they be entitled to a subsidy?
Well, I can say that you would not be eligible for the emergency response benefit because you have to show that you don't have any income at all.
Right.
And I think in that situation,
14 days is the time frame. I believe you have to have no income for 14 days before applying.
Yes, and the starting date for that is March 15th.
March 15th. Okay.
Yeah.
Bruce Stewart, Jordan, being that your roots are in Pemberton in farming, is there an appetite to keep the farmers in Pemberton and plant produce specifically for the Sea to Sky corridor? I'm concerned about food security in the province and the corridor.
Thanks, Bruce. And I think that was co-op.
Oh, I didn't even.
I think that's a.
Thank you. Yes, it was.
It's although coop could work too, depending on what crop you're talking about. But I think that's an excellent question, and Bruce would probably have some insight into that because as I mentioned, the Solicitor General had emphasized the need to safeguard our supply chains, but the supplies also need to be coming. And when we think about how California is limiting the movement in that state, and that is in many ways the breadbasket certainly of the produce side for much of North America. And so I think that we could anticipate that there will be some challenges around certain crops. In terms of co-oping in Pemberton, I think there is certainly discussion. I know there's discussion right now amongst the farming community in terms of what that could look like, how that can work. albeit farmers are independent entrepreneur businessmen and women just like everybody else, and so there needs to be a high level of cooperation to try and determine what that could look like so that it could benefit the region. There was an announcement last week, interestingly, around farmers markets and relevant to Whistler and the Whistler farmers market, but that the announcement was that only food vendors would be able to attend the market, so no crafters. So that does give potentially access for farmers to the retail market or remain having access in Whistler, and then working with the local retailers to support what the customers need. Now, that said, I would encourage people to get a hold of Bruce or get a hold of myself, and let's think a little bit about what we can do and how we can support food sustainability in the region to everybody's benefit.
That's great. Thank you, Jordan. That's it's on the minds of a lot of people, I'm sure. Sarah Struther is with Peak News Magazine. She's asking regarding revenues. Revenues must have decreased by 30% to qualify for the 75% wage subsidy. What if you are a non-for-profit or organization that earns its revenues through annual fees or dues, and your current statements will not show the 30% revenue reduction? Thank you, Sarah, for asking that question. How is the 30% reduction measured, and what is the period? The Chamber is a great example of that, where our memberships are brought in at the beginning of the year, Whistler Experiences at the beginning of the year, and really that's where we, as many other chambers and non-for-profits, have certain times where we get that, and then it slows right down. So, yeah, what does that look like?
That's a very good question, and I don't have the answer for that yet. So
yes,
I'm hoping hoping I can by this time tomorrow I'll know that.
That would be great.
What I can do is I'll get back to you.
Calling you. Kirby Brown, wow, nice to see you out there, Kirby. You've had quite a season so far, but we're really looking forward to your second reopening coming up. Kirby's with Sea to Sky Gondola. Kirby's question is, let me just see here, it's long, but let me read it. As the crisis subsides, we all want to get our teams back to work as soon as that's responsible to do so, and we have the social license to do so. I'd like to suggest a certification process for reopening businesses based on their ability to do so safely, using the existing environmental health officer process for reviewing the health and safety of businesses. Operators would submit an operating plan for reviewing, showing how they're able to maintain social distancing and sanitation standards. The EHO would then do a site inspection, and when infection rates drop to a prescribed level base, the certified businesses would be encouraged to get back into operations. What do you think? I think you put a lot of thought into that, Kirby. That's great.
Yeah, it's an interesting proposition. We certainly take our direction from the provincial health officer, and in terms of what it looks like for businesses to reopen. We're a long way from there, frankly. We've got to see some long-term consistency in terms of the approach or in terms of the numbers, and really get ourselves down to zero. So I think we'll be seeing direction from the provincial health officer in this regard, and it's looking at what is a critical industry, or what is the sectors that are essential. I think it's important to focus on right now, and then how we can ensure that those workers are safe, and that those industries are safe and the public is safe. So it's some interesting suggestion, Kirby, and thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Kirby. From Jackie Basilian, let me just write that in. Recently, there was an article where'd she go? Oh, there it is. Recently, there was an article regarding the need for foreign farm workers. My company has been working very closely with a Pemberton farm to find them local workers. We did a brief recruiting campaign and were overwhelmed by hundreds of applications. many of them with farming experience and most desperate for income and housing. I'd like to encourage farmers in the corridor and province to hire local workers during this period of this time of crisis. Is this something that you would consider? Jordan, I take it that would go to you.
Yeah, certainly. I've been encouraging people to forward me their, in terms of our business, their experience. And depending on what the farming operation is, they have more or less need for manual labor, or depending on how mechanized their industry or their business is.
Mm-hmm.
It is complicated. It is a complicated business, and I have actually suggested at one point that I was thinking about this yesterday and thinking, it's like asking, can a lifty be a fine dining chef?
Right.
Yeah, they're available. Do they have the requisite experience? And
right.
every agricultural business is different, so it's hard to answer the question for everybody. But certainly, in our case, or the Pemberton Farmers Institute might be a place to also contribute or also put forward your name as a potential worker.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, it's a tough time for sure. Claire Ruddy, many businesses and non-for-profits are also looking at huge declines in summer revenues. The 75% wage subsidy is contingent on 30% loss of revenues. Would that include projected? I think that goes back to the same question really that we were asking about earlier, where we make our money here, but we're not going to show a huge loss of revenue now.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't have an answer to that yet, but it is a really important consideration. It's one I'll bring up later today. The details of this are going to be released tomorrow, so I would stay tuned for that. But I think that is a very important consideration that needs to be considered, and I'll bring it up later today.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. Sarah McCullough, Whistler Blackcomb, is there potential to spend some of the BC recovery dollars on saving businesses before they fold so that there are businesses to support the recovery? We look at our community of majority small, very small business, and that's a big concern is when we do get into recovery mode, how many of them are actually going to be able to come back and how do we sustain them now? Is that something that you have some sort of insight to, Jordan, at this point, or?
I wish I did. It's as I said, it's 1.5 billion that is associated with recovery. No clarification or specifics on how that money will be spent.
Right. So Christopher Bosman. For Jordan, does the provincial state of emergency now force municipal employees back to work? The construction industry is concerned that if municipal governments do not continue with work with permits and rezoning applications, the recover time for industry will be extended with a hole in the workflow.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good
great question.
Observation. Yes. No, I actually haven't looked through the list of essential services, but I know that there are certainly portions of the federal, provincial, and municipal governments that are essential. There's no question about that. We need to keep the water flowing and the toilets flushing and et cetera. In terms of what's critical or what is essential services within the municipality, you'd have to look at the specifics of that. But if people can work from home, if people can work safely, then I think the general message is we want people to continue to work. We want the economy to keep going as best we can in this very challenging time. So you'd have to look to your local government. And I would hope that there would be a continual processing of applications.
Mm-hmm. From Carrie Jones, who owns Peak Pies, the government was very quick to close small business down to facilitate social distancing. Why can't they make the same quick decision to help us for rental reductions and other fixed overheads and expenses and have our landlords to also reduce their takes? I know some of that, like landlords, is a tough one, but again, if you have an answer to any of that or support, or take it back with you as a concern.
Yep, fair enough. Although many of the businesses did close as a business decision, as opposed to being required to close, the restaurants and that sort of thing were perhaps a significant exception to that. But beyond that, it's really are you an essential service, and how can you operate safely?
Right.
Which I do think speaks to Kirby's point about how do we ensure that people are operating safely, or how can the public be confident that a business is providing service in a safe way?
No, exactly. Agreed. Alistair Cray is with Whistler Cooks. The question is a tenant for the rent subsidy able to be a business renting a residential property?
Good question. I think that you had to be participating in EI or one of the other programs. So I would think no, but that's a good question, and
maybe
we'll try and track that down.
Yeah, exactly. Sarah McCullough, our non-Canadian Are non-Canadian owned businesses eligible for the wage subsidy program?
Is that like Vail? Is that what she's saying?
She might be asking about Vail. Maybe.
As far as I understand it, yes. Like I said, the details of this are going to be released tomorrow. But given the parameters were mentioned to be very broad today, so businesses of all sizes, nonprofits, I don't think there's been no distinction made, at least to this point, that those companies would be excluded. So I would anticipate that those companies would be eligible for the same legislative subsidy.
Help a lot of the employees get back to work, no doubt. From an anonymous attendee, will businesses renting houses or homes for staff housing will businesses renting houses for staff housing have access to temporary rental supplements?
I think that was the question we just tried to answer unsatisfactorily, yes.
Yeah, we did. Carrie Jones back with a question. The government has proposed rental rules and restrictions for residential tenants. What is the government's expectation for small businesses paying commercial rent?
Yeah, I mentioned that provincially anyway, is that at this point we don't have any clarity on commercial leases or rents or limitations on evictions.
Is the CERM, which is of $2,000, available for small business owners who are closed or have reduced income to COVID-19?
So yes and no. So if you have no income for 14 days, you're eligible for it. If you have some income, then you're not eligible for it. So, but as a small business owner, you would be eligible.
Right. Is the government going to defer the date for the minimum wage to go up? That was a big question for a lot of people. It's not that, from my understanding and anecdotally, of course, speaking to business owners, it's not that they don't think that an employee should be receiving more money. It's a matter of financial stability for them to be able to reopen and then not have that next wage increase. Has that been brought to the table yet, Jordan?
It hasn't been mentioned, no, but it certainly has been talked about and suggested. Whether government determines to enact it or not, they haven't indicated one way or the other at this point.
Right. For Patrick, deadline for wage subsidy accrual. When we are not open is not beneficial for us. Is there an opportunity to push back past the 3 months?
Well, I think it kind of relates to a question that was raised earlier as well, and I can't say for sure at this point, but like I said, the details are going to be released tomorrow. But it is something I'll bring up later today.
Great. Peter Burke. Peter is a colleague of mine in another chamber, so welcome. Jordan, any talk of immediate reinstatement to the rural dividend program that was suspended last year and I believe was to be revisited this year. That was a really great program too. It really helped a lot of communities to build infrastructure needed to support their communities. I'm wondering, I have the same question, so thanks for asking, Pete.
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly we've been pushing to have the rural dividend program reinstated. It was diverted to the forest sector and into another program. But I can't help but think that this will be part of the recovery piece as we go forward.
Right.
But at this point, no announcements with regard to the rural dividend.
Okay. Jordan, another one from you from John Grills. Is the province considering a penalty-free payment schedule for 2020 property taxes?
Good question, John. Again, the only property tax announcements at this point have been around the 50% reduction in the school tax for class 4, 5, and 6. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, there hasn't been any other announcements. And although we were also hoping to see some clarification on the highest best use with regard to the property tax assessment piece, which may or may not be as relevant in Whistler, but certainly is in other communities, especially in more in Metro Vancouver, where we're seeing very significant property taxes as a result of what the potential is, as opposed to what the reality is on the ground.
Right. Okay, from Pre, would there be any federal funding for the commercial rent piece? I really think that that it will be to the demise of many local businesses. True.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I can tell you right now is the mortgage payment deferral process should apply for commercial leases and commercial mortgages as well. Ideally that would be passed on to, or that benefit would be passed along to their tenants in some way. Mm-hmm. I can tell you this is a discussion that we're absolutely happening right now. That's absolutely happening right now in our caucus. So. But at this point, I can't say anything that's in the pipeline or development right now.
Great. From Pepe, some businesses will not be able to make rent payments now or in the next 4 months as cash flow is tight. Will there be conversations to temporarily change lease regulations for businesses?
There may well be conversations. I am not optimistic that the government will get involved in individual terms of leases in the province, but it's an interesting question.
Right. Now, the next one is, what are the governments going to do to ease the burden on businesses that are already leveraged and see cash flow bring to a challenge and do not qualify for BDC loans? Example, will they look at relaxing the rules around qualifying the BDC loans?
Yeah, well, I mean, what is the name of there's the $40,000 no interest loan that was put forward on Friday. That would be a loan that would be available to them for those type of businesses. That's the Canada Emergency Business Account.
Right.
So to qualify for this, you just need to show that you have a paid payroll between $50,000 and $1 million last year.
In total payroll for 2019, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and the other part as well here is there was a couple announcements made last week that I kind of sped through. There is the loan guarantee done by Export Development Canada for credit and cash flow loans by banks, and these loans would be up to $6.25 million. So in some of the businesses that operate on kind of smaller margins, this would be able to provide a guarantee and allow for that credit to be kind of extended with the loan guarantee from the federal government.
Right, and then I understand with the Canada Emergency Business Account that the repay of the loan is on or before December 31st, 2022. Will result in, and if you do that, there's a loan result forgiveness of up to 25% of the $40,000, which is $10,000.
Yeah, it would be 25%. So it would
25%.
just, that part is not up to, would be 25%.
It's 25%, great, okay. As non-for-profits may be likely to lose 30% of its revenue over the coming months, but has received unusual high donations in March, which resulted in less than a 30% decrease in revenue. Would it be eligible? So that's another one for the 75%. So you get all these not-for-profits that are now, the food bank's getting a lot of money, everyone's kind of pouring in to support, which is really going to offset their eligibility. So that's another question maybe you could bring to the table is how does that impact their eligibility? Because really that money, I'm assuming, just understanding my own business, will be used very quickly to support the needs of today. So it's all money being driven for COVID, not for the functioning of normality in their business.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And, organizations like food banks are having to do a lot more. And so I think that's something that needs to be taken into account. And I'm sure that's been thought about, but it's something that we're going to have a discussion today to kind of sort through some of these details with the rest of caucus. So that's something I'll definitely bring up. One of the big challenges for a lot of nonprofits is so much of the revenue that they do raise is from face-to-face events that they can't have. So for those, it's really easy to show. But for nonprofits that are doing even more than before, I don't think that should be a reason not to qualify.
Right. Okay. Our mayor is on the call today, and Jack Crompton, welcome. Our chamber group benefits considered income as it relates to the requirement that people not receive other income to qualify for CERB. So that's interesting. So if you lay somebody off temporarily, potentially, and they're still receiving benefits, do they still qualify for CERB? I don't know if I said that either.
That's a good question. I'll have to get back on that. And sorry, which benefits specifically?
It's the chamber group insurance plan is what he's asking about. But I think any insurance plan would probably be considered.
I think the key to show is that you don't have any income.
Right.
So benefits, I believe you would still qualify because you would still not have the income.
Right. Okay. But more clarification coming.
Yeah. And I think an important distinction there is, for businesses where people are still working but not being paid, like furloughed businesses, you would still qualify. And so presumably you would keep your benefits. And so that would be similar to this. So I can pretty safely say that you would qualify, but I'll double check it.
Double check. Okay, great. And we're going to stay in communication anyways. We've been sending out e-news correspondence to our members daily almost last week, and then making sure every 48 hours. So we'll keep in touch with both of you for updates. From Bruce Stewart, Patrick, being that grocery stores are deemed an essential service, are our employees supported the same way as medical professional, examples, daycare costs?
I'm a little confused to the question.
I am too. That Patrick, I'm going to hold off on that. And Bruce, if you want to rewrite your question, I'll look for it at the bottom just to clarify exactly what the question is. Back to Peter. Patrick, again to you. My understanding is that 10% wage subsidy was going to be considered revenue for the business/organization. Is that the case with the new version of the delivery?
That it would be considered a revenue for the business. Yeah, I can't, like I said, some of the details are coming tomorrow. So I can't, I can't say for sure.
At least it'll prompt you to ask the questions. I think this is really good for preparation for your meetings. Rick Clare, I haven't seen Rick for a while, so welcome, Rick. A business committed to renting a house for staff is very different beast than a person renting a house to sublet. So I'm not sure if that's a question or a statement, but it sounds like it might just be a statement. Kathy Jewett, food banks have increased supply costs. How will these expenses be supported? Not sure if it's either one of you can take that one.
Yeah, I know that part of the funding formula in terms of the critical supplement to critical services is for food banks, and there was some announcements on Friday with regard to food banks, and I'm sorry, I'm not. I know there was some additional money put in place for food banks because the demand is certainly going to be increasing.
Right. Okay. Wage subsidy is not applicable if we are not open. So thanks for that, Pre. Okay, let's see if we got a question here. What if you, oops, where'd Sarah go? There she is. Keeps popping around. What if you have just started working and have not reached the $5,000? Are you not eligible for CERB? And again, I think going back to the 14 days, you cannot make any money, correct? No income whatsoever within 14 days of application.
Yeah, and so for CERB, you need to attest to the fact that you've made at least $5,000 in the last calendar year or the last 12 months.
Right.
And so if you have not yet made up to that amount, you wouldn't qualify.
From Joel Chevalier, is there any indication at the federal or provincial levels about what the metrics need to look like before we start to see a return to normal? Ooh. I just did the same thing.
I can't say that I have the answer to that, but I would suspect that what we would be looking at is no new infections
right.
for a period of time.
Yeah, and that's going to come from our health officers. If we watch that every day, we'll start to see hopefully some good news coming sooner than later. And that goes back to how much work we do now to stay home as much as possible without having to go to the stores. But I think washing your hands and doing everything that they're suggesting that we do.
Yeah, and I think the good news there is that with the news on Friday that we're not on the Italy track, we're more on the South Korea track is a very good one. But likewise, I couldn't provide exact metrics to say when we're going to be back to normal.
I think we all could do that.
I think it would be fair to say though that realistically normal means I think we'll have to get to a point where we have a vaccine.
Yeah.
You know, is what that comes down to. So we're a year away from normal.
Right.
Yeah.
There is some great work being done. Actually, there's a Vancouver-based company called Abcellera that's been.
What's it called? Sorry, Patrick, say that again.
It's called Abcellera, like ABCELLERA. And actually, the CFO of the company is he's a constituent of mine based in Squamish, and they have a very interesting technology. I won't go into the details of it, but I would invite everybody to have a look at that. And we've announced 192 million in funding for research, and they're one of the organizations that have got it. And they've got a lot of funding from the U.S. U.S. Defense. They have a special program focused on pandemics, and they were the company that got the funding their program. And they have a very very interesting technology that I would invite people to have a look at.
Right. Could you I saw you in the I think the chat room earlier. If you have the website, you can drop it into the chat room so that if you know it. Otherwise, what we can do is send it out to our audience after the call. That'd be really good. It just sounds really interesting. So yeah, thank you. So a couple of remaining questions about the wage subsidy, which may come out in the coming days, but just in case. Number one, what is the salary cap for the 75,000? And I believe it was 58.7. Yeah, so 58.
Yeah, that's correct.
So we know that. So is 75% of the maximum salary, and the maximum salary was $875 per week.
$847 a week.
$47 a week. So does the employer have to top up the remaining 25% to qualify for 75%? Or if not affordable by employer, can the 75 be the total wage?
As far as I understand it, 75% can be the total wage. And I was very surprised that in the press conference today that a reporter didn't ask that question.
Right.
But of course, the details will be available tomorrow. But how it has been described so far, I don't believe you would have to make up the last 25%.
I think what the PM even said this morning was more about if you can to top it up with the 25%. So I think it sounded to me like it was a decision that's made by the business owner to do what they can to support that. Any consideration for extending the 13-week period for temporary layoff?
Is that's a provincial question? My understanding was that the temporary layoffs are only applicable if with the consent of the worker.
That's correct.
I'm not sure. We've been trying to determine what is the best approach for both the employer and the employee. in
Yeah.
terms of benefits to the to both
Right.
essentially, but certainly to the employee. So I would encourage, accessing all the programs you can, and there is a bit of a moving target right now, and
It is.
see what is the best circumstance that we can generate ultimately with hopefully being able to be productive and being able to contribute and being able to be part of a business. I think is better than not, but
Right.
again, it really
No, I
comes
agree.
down to individual circumstances.
And we just had an HR webinar not too long ago, and it's interesting because it changes. So I'm sure we'll bring back another one. We continue these series with different topics. So that's probably going to be one that people want to hear, is how to access and what's the best case for each business. Pepe, can there be a regulation for this year where businesses that are not able to make rent payments on time will not be breached the terms of the lease, and that landlords will not put businesses at default for not making the rent payment on the first of the month? Businesses lose their rights when they are in default and cannot make use of business lease extensions. And this is huge for our community. We're so heavily based on small businesses within the village and Function Junction and everywhere. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question, Pepe, and it's certainly something that we've been pushing to see if the province will come out with some policy around commercial spaces, commercial leases, and evictions, because you're absolutely right. In the case of commercial side, anyway, there's little leeway to without a landlord that is sympathetic.
right. Carrie Jones, Jordan, a question for you again. As you said, we are potentially a full year away from normal. The government had closed restaurants. Landlords are not being considerate when it comes to commercial rent and leases. Are you actually going to say that we are fully bound by leases we signed by pre-COVID, and that the government will not step in? The amount of rent we owe over the next 12 months will drain our cash flow. And is that okay with you? Is that something that you can bring to the government then, Jordan, and talk to them about the concerns that
Well, yeah, no, I would say, and I'm not a lawyer, but I would suggest that that leases are leases, and the terms are in place. Will government step in? I'm very much hopeful that government will make some statements around commercial leases and rents, and try and come up with solutions there. I'm certainly sympathetic. I understand exactly the question. I just don't have an answer for the question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
From Rick Clare, to clarify my comment about, here we go, business. Oh, where'd you go? Hang on a second, it pops around a little bit. To clarify my comment about business renting houses for staff, will a business who has committed to guarantee the rent for staff be able to get a subsidy for houses that are now empty because of business closures? And that might be to the $500 piece that he was talking about, or we were talking about earlier. Shall I repeat?
Yeah, I can't answer that question, but we'll certainly see what we can do to follow up on that, Rick.
Thank you. Can the work share program be accessed by seasonal workers?
Unfortunately not. It's seasonal businesses where you have a regular kind of disruption to your business, which is because of the seasons, you don't qualify, unfortunately. So this is for things that are completely unforeseen, that interrupts a business. So like, for instance, COVID, that would be the reason, but for ones that it is foreseen, you wouldn't qualify, unfortunately.
Patrick, this question for you again. Many people have multiple streams of income. What if you are employed and still working, but your self-employed side business that you rely on is now generating no income? Can you apply for the emergency benefit to stay afloat?
It's a very good question. I believe that you would be able to, but it's something I'll have to look into.
Okay, great. Again, for Patrick, will the government determine which businesses have or do not have the ability to top up the remaining 25%, or will it leave it entirely up to the business owners?
I think for this one, I'm going to have to look at the details tomorrow. But if it follows the same way that the Canada Emergency Response Benefit has been developed, it would be an attestation form, and so it would be up to the business, like the applicant individual to kind of attest to that. But I can't say for sure until the details of the program are going to be released tomorrow.
Great. Next question is just to confirm the max wage subsidy, and it is up to the first $58,700 that a person earns, and up to $847 a week, which is backdated to March 15th.
Correct.
Okay. Sarah, can non-Canadian businesses access the work share program, not just temporary foreign workers, but also in working holiday visas?
I believe you would be able to access that program as well. If but I'd have to look at the details of it. But I believe you would be able to access it in that situation.
Jordan, a question for you on MSP. Any changes to the wait period or eligibility for MSP?
I believe that the wait period has been waived, but I'll again get confirmation of that. But yes, I heard that last week.
Okay, great. Provincially, is there any consideration to forgive outstanding balance and refund funds already paid for EHT?
I understand that the EHT is amounts that have been due are still due, but going forward, they're deferred to the end of September.
Right. Not
waived, deferred.
Right, deferred. Okay. So we have, wow, we went through a lot of questions, 62 questions. Well done, gents. That was a lot of questions. Thank you for everybody that is on our webinar this morning. I wanted to leave you both with one last question, which may or may not have already been answered, but what is your biggest concern for our corridor? When you look at the bigger picture in your federal or provincial, what is your biggest concern? Jordan, do you want to start?
Well, on the recovery side is how we are going to recover. We are such a tourism dependent region that without people traveling from all around the world, how can we ever possibly see the type of revenues and employees and activity that we have been used to over the course of the last decade or more? So recovery is critical. What does that look like? How do we redefine tourism in going forward? What will our future look like in terms of health, in terms of our way that we interact with people? Obviously it's catastrophic, I think it's fair to say, and recovery and what our new future is going to look like is
it's unknown.
Uncertain, but unknown, but critical. Biggest worry I have.
Yeah, thank you. Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I have similar worry, given the importance of tourism in the Sea to Sky area, and especially Whistler. That's really top of mind. And that's why we're in the process right now of developing a specific stimulus for tourism. But it's gonna require us to rethink of the type of tourism we're gonna get. I sit on the bipartisan tourism committee, or caucus, I should say, for all parties. And it was interesting. Our first meeting was late February, and we were talking about how we're going to change our marketing efforts with Destination Canada to account for what was going to be a drop in visitors from China. And obviously that's changed very quickly now, and we're going to have to focus on probably a lot more domestic tourism and focus marketing efforts that way. We're going to have to look at which countries are still going to be doing a lot of travel. So it's very much a moving target. But those are the conversations that I'm trying to get involved as possible as I can. And I know the Minister of Economic Development, which focuses on tourism as well, is quite aware of that. And that's why it's so important that we get feedback from everybody here, so we can make sure that the programs that are developed make sense, especially for Whistler. And I think Whistler is a very very unique almost. I mean, there's probably a few other resorts, resort municipalities, across the country that are in a similar situation, but it's not the same as tourism writ large across the country.
I mean, our community literally shut down overnight through this, so it's we certainly felt it very, very quickly. We're almost like micro community to feel those things. So so I look forward to that recovery date for sure. And thank you, by the way, for connecting me with Minister Jolie. I'm hoping to hear from her this week, and certainly give her some feedback on where we're at as a community and our concerns about the recovery part. Do either of you have any more comments? Otherwise, I might just close out the session.
If I could, Melissa, I just want to encourage people who have ideas about how we can maintain as much resilience as possible in our tourism sector, and what are next steps for us going forward. What are ideas about how we can create a more sustainable tourism industry in the era that we live in now, and what does that mean? And I know that and I'm sure Patrick as well, would love to hear feedback from everybody of all types. No idea should be discarded. Let's look at everything, because we are really going to have to cast the net wide and try and figure out what our future looks like.
100%. And in saying that, I'm in our chamber, myself, is in communication with our resort partners every day. We have a phone call every day at 12:30 with the RMOW, Tourism Whistler, Whistler Blackcomb, and ourselves. And it'd be a great idea to bring together a collaboration of that on a webinar like this, where we can actually have live and bring in Tourism Whistler. I know that they've been working very closely with Destination Canada and Destination BC, and with the governments as well. So I will, I'll speak to our partners about that and get some sort of a webinar going at some point. I think we still are not quite into recovery mode, but certainly down the road, that'll be a great suggestion. So thank you for that. So we are just in closing. We're recording these webinars and loading them onto our chamber's website, so you can go back to them anytime. So if you've missed something, you can go back. So whistlerchamber.com, and you'll be able to find this webinar along with other helpful tools and resources that we've been building since mid-March. We'll continue to stay connected with all of you through regular e-news updates, and we'll be hosting more free webinars to help you navigate these difficult days. So stay tuned for that. A quote from a huge supporter, Tess Evans with HR Galaxy. She said, our country, our province, and our community will love, I think that's what I put in there, will move forward, and if we work on the principles of our health officials are asking us for, we will be healthy community. So that was very true. Thank you both for taking the time to speak with our community today, and we very much appreciate the work that you're doing and your continued support in the upcoming weeks. So thank you again, everybody, and I hope to see you on the recovery end of this sooner than later. So thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.